Let me just ask a question on that first item. Does the current transfer that we're looking at for 100,000, that will cover the 38,000 shortfall you currently have and give you 63,000 more for the rest of the year? Does that, I guess you're not sure whether that will be sufficient for the rest of the year? You'll need to do more. Right. First, can you check that the mic is turned on there? Make sure everyone can hear you. And then can you remind me your fiscal 20 budget? Are you concerned about that current budget at the moment?
It says, I'm always concerned. I live in concern. Thanks to the Board of Ed's budgeting, we added a significant amount of money to the line. So I am concerned, but I think the number that we put in is close to the average we've seen over the past 3 years, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we will come in at that number.
And will you share with us, please, what that number is that you budgeted? Because quite frankly, we saw a lot of numbers.
We added in $600,000 to the line, so the budget for this year is down on the bottom.
Was 4.8.
So it's 5.4 million is the total, and that was a 600,000 increase.
So, Leslie, we just read the question so that
Yes,
the public knows.
Right. So then we wanted, and this followed up actually from a question we had back at the full-day budget hearing, but understanding in this line item, it's a combination of both tuition for out-of-district students and settlements, and we asked for a breakout or an understanding of those two categories.
Correct, and what I gave you is the breakdown. I just want to give you one clarification. If you look at where it says district placements, there is a line item in there for a program called Effective School Solutions, which is an outside contractor that provides clinical social work for students at Greenwich High School. Because of the nature of the service they provide, they're an outside company, it's included in district placements. That's the only oddity in that line, and it's about $260,000. Everything else is individual student placements. There are 29 students placed out of district. There are also students in that line who have individual summer school placements. Usually they run about $1,000 to $3,000. They're not substantial. We also carry lines in there for programs that support students' education while they're in hospitals or incarcerated. So it's not an individual student, it would be to Four Winds Hospital, and then we pay for their education while they're in the hospital.
And just, again, a lot of this is just for our education, so we can know more looking forward, but was a lot of the unexpected activity this year in one category or the other, tuitions versus settlements?
We've had a substantial increase in the request for due process and hearing. We've also seen an increase in the students requesting out-of-district placements who've never been in the Greenwich Public Schools. They either move in with an IEP that requires an out-of-district placement, or they're students who've been in private school who now require special education services and have been outplaced by their parents prior to being in the Greenwich Public Schools. Those two numbers of cases has increased this year.
You know, one of the goals is to try to service the students in district as best we can. Sometimes that's why you find yourself in these due process hearings, because there's a disagreement between the parents and the district as to the best path for their students.
And the next question is just what actions can be taken to try to reduce the uncertainty? And I know you're probably more frustrated or that may not be the right word, but than we are with this particular uncertainty in this budget line.
That's probably exactly the right word.
Lori and I had a conversation about this. I think there are actions that are going to fall in two different categories. One is what can we do programmatically in the Greenwich Public Schools to serve more kids with different sorts of needs in district as much as we can. The other issues are budgetarily issues. How budgetarily can we put aside money? Something like a subject to release fund or putting aside some money something else. That's outside of my area of expertise. That would be looking at, are there accounting/budgetary ways to set aside money for unexpected expenditures in this line? That you have to talk to accountants about. We are certainly using things like Effective School Solutions. We have a very, I think, robust mental health support service network in schools to work with students who require those out-of-district placements. But I think you've got to look in both ways about how we can address the unanticipated costs.
I'm sure this is a high priority for everyone in the district.
Maybe,
Ms. Tarkin.
I was just going to ask, we've asked for some breakouts and some other information. Maybe we should do that in another session sometime? Haven't we asked for a breakout between? I thought we couldn't just add to this account without creating some kind of risk. Isn't that what you've told us before, Peter?
Well, the idea is you're trying not to increase your budget one year over the next, because next year we may not have as many students. You really can't pull back money once it's in that line.
Right, that's what our
But
concern has been.
It's based on need. It's not as if
Right.
we have an actual need, we have a legal obligation we've got to meet, so we've got no choice.
Thank you.
And
The other thing I just mentioned in here was, remember that we're setting a budget almost a full school year prior to needing the money. So anything that's happening from like October till June of 2019, we didn't know about when we crafted the budget back in September. So some of it is the length of our cycle in terms of budgeting. That means that a lot of things are happening to kids and in schools before the actual budget goes into play.
excess cost, yeah, we asked a question about excess. Remind us exactly how that works, because I believe there's a timing difference, there's an application process, and the state still has some discretion in how much they award the district, so.
Correct.
I'd be grateful, actually, if you educate me altogether about how the excess cost grants work altogether.
We have currently 47 students who qualify for excess cost. Excess cost is calculated by looking at the total cost of the student's education, and any student who's more than 4.5 times the per pupil of the district, the state is supposed to reimburse us back anything over 4.5 times. They don't have to be out-of-district students. We have a number of students in district whose costs exceed the excess cost threshold of 4.5 times. We calculate that out. We send in that number to the state. So those students in total calculated the $5,598,000. They then deduct anything 4.5 times overall per pupil, and then there's a number we're supposed to get back. The state then, based on the excess cost requests that come from districts around the state, does what we refer to affectionately as the haircut, which is that we can't give everybody exactly what they asked for or do because we don't have enough money as a state in that line, so they take a percentage off what the district is entitled to and send it back. I have our number. I don't know what the percentage haircut was this year.
Is that a postponement of the balance, or is that a denial of the balance?
Denial.
So having made an undertaking to you that they'll reimburse everything over 4.5 times your average cost, in fact, they don't necessarily reimburse that, and you don't have any idea in advance what the reimbursement's going to be.
Correct.
And the cap of the 4.5, there's no protection for the district against a greater head count of kids who are needing SPED, a special education program. It's only this qualified protection on the excess cost on a per student basis.
Correct. There's one exception. Students who are placed by the Department of Children and Families, those students, we receive excess cost over just our per pupil. So if the Department of Children and Family Services takes protection of a child and moves them to another district or to a private placement, we only have to pay our per pupil for those students, not the 4.5 times.
And if the department brings a child into our district, who's paying the excess cost in that case? We're picking that up as one of our SPED students?
They come into our district as a student with requiring services.
So we're paying the excess cost at that point.
They're usually not excess cost students.
Okay.
What's the timing. So you've applied for the 47 students in the current fiscal year under that?
Yes.
And you would get the grant in this current fiscal year also, or is there a delay?
They give us this number.
That's right. The town of Greenwich gets a grant because the town is funding your full cost
So
of
in December,
operations.
we filed the excess cost application. The money just came in now. There is a correction that occurs in October of the subsequent school year. So if we add students or if a student leaves the district, they correct the number, and there's a correction that happens in October. And then in December, we make the calculation for that year, and it goes in. So it's a kind of a revolving door where you are actually correcting in the next fiscal year.
Is there any protection in the system that to protect communities? How do I describe this? If I have communities that are harsher with the families about providing the educational care, and the families are drifting away from those communities, going to communities where the communities are more generous or more forgiving in it, is there any protection in the system to try and oblige the communities that are harsh to meet their standard, so that communities that are less harsh aren't collecting everybody else's sped students?
Well, we all operate under the same Connecticut state guidelines, so we have federal and state guidelines we have to follow in all communities. If parents want to move to a different community for a better education or a different education, they do that routinely. They do it for kids with disabilities, and they do it for kids without disabilities. I'm sure there are families that move to Greenwich because of our program in Gifted and Talented or our high school science program. So there are families that, move around.
How rigorous is the state enforcement process with the communities that may not be meeting their obligations?
There certainly is a system in place to monitor special education compliance. In fact, I just got our letter today about compliance monitoring. So they do monitor it. And then we have, I would say, a pretty robust due process system that protects the rights of families who want to come forward.
Thank you. I don't want to go too far afield, but thank you for the education.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
So back to number one, I just want to put the numbers together because this is a little bit of a revenue question I might have for Roland. So we believe your original appropriation this year was 4.8. We transferred in 300. We're about to do another 100. That's 400. So the first question is, that gives you a 67 balance, but you have anticipated additional expenditures 548.
Yes.
You think that's going to happen before the end of your school year or before the end of the fiscal year?
And as I said at the beginning, we're doing our best in special education to hold the line as much as we can on the lines I have control over. And I know that the system is looking at places where routinely in the past we have found money at the end of the year. So some of the salary savings are things where we have had.
I'm just trying to figure, because this is a transfer, and if those numbers are accurate, first of all, it begs, there's two questions it begs. Number one is, are we going to be okay elsewhere where we took the 400 from? That's number one. Number two is, if you don't have enough, the timing to get, if you have to go interim by chance, because of the timing of it. And then I would ask Roland, do we have projected that revenue in this year? What they're talking about in the bottom?
Excess costs.
Excess cost, do we have that?
No, we don't.
So that's just fund balance when it comes in. So that's the part. I just want to, for ease for you, if you think that this is going to go to that kind of number, I mean, we could do the transfer today, but I think we ought to start coming up with the plan B for how we get the rest ahead of time.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Mike, is we're trying to stay ahead of it as best we can, right? We don't like running negative balances in lines.
No.
But we also don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. If, knock on wood, I don't have any near me, we don't need to expend that money. We don't want it sitting in that line. We want it in the lines where it was anticipated to be spent. We are asking for the additional funds for next year's budget because we know we need to at least get to a certain level. If likely go beyond that level. We don't know. So we're trying to operate on a as we know basis right now.
Okay. Any further questions? No. So
For
can I-
next year, we budgeted on the excess cost sharing, a revenue item of 0 on that.
We always do because you really don't know what you're going to get back from the state. It's kind of a mystery sometimes.
Just
Thank you.
unfortunately for the state, though, just keep in mind, ECS is two different things.
No.
Right.
There's
And we
excess
budgeted
cost,
zero for that, too. but-
and there's educational cost sharing.
Right. And to pick up Mary's point, the excess cost goes back to the general fund. The Board of Ed budget isn't expected to cover their expenditures in this area. So, all right, if I can have a motion to approve the transfer of 100,000 into Mr. Mason,
And seconded.
second by Mr. Raymer. All
As a
those in-
routine item, or?
It transfers just go
Just-
to
Oh,
the
right,
right,
budget
right, right,
committee.
right,
It doesn't go to the
right,
full
right,
BET.
right, right.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
thank you very much for taking me early, I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yes, we'll have it posted
Well, there's
under the,
no packet on this to the DET.
Right.
But
this, we'll post it to the budget committee agenda page on the website.
Yeah, this is, that really, I'm trying to plan ahead for them. because I don't
They
want
need
them
to
have
keep the May
do this
date
in
for
May.
submission to the
Right,
June RTM
right. I
on
don't
their
want to see
calendars.
them, because that's
Okay.
a tough time of year for them
All right,
anyway.
so back to the agenda, and I want to thank everyone here's patience, but the Budget Committee needs to go into an executive session now for pending litigation, so can I have a motion to move into executive
moved.
session?
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
3.
Right.
We're referring to the full BET with no action. So we're now doing a fire, FD2, fire, the release of conditions of Round Hill Station. So thank you for attending tonight and for our executive session delay. You were last here in December, and we had a very good discussion. Thank you. And there were 3 items, I think, that were left open from that discussion requiring more information. One was more information about the title, the septic, and then the management agreement. Mr. Brandon, you want to update us on those 3?
Attached to the application, I took the meeting minutes and then tried to deal with each one of the open items. So on the update on Round Hill, on item 1, you did receive the memo from the law department regarding the title issue, which we believe is in order. I think the concern you had back in December was whether or not the proposed renovation would receive permits from the health department and the building department. I spoke with both Michael Long from the health department and Bill Maher from the building department on 2 separate occasions, one before and then one after they had individual meetings with Round Hill to discuss a renovations plan. A little outside of the norm is just they were looking for opinions to be formally issued to the department, to you. So what I'm attempting to do is they've made statements to me as the town administrator that the plans that they reviewed more than likely would be issued permits. And they still reserve their right to have a formal, when it's formally submitted to them, but based on everything they saw, they believe both from the building department and from the health department, the permits would be issued. So as my attempt to address your concern, rather than them putting that in writing, that's statements they made to me verbally, which I'm putting in writing and relaying to the committee. And last was just the conversation about, and the conditions was contractual arrangements. We have made significant progress on the original development plan that the BET received in December was the first draft. Both the town's attorney and Round Hill's attorney are in conversations to codify some of the agreements that we've reached, and we've talked about the clawback provision. We had a very good conversation about what the cease operations mean. So that's the biggest updates on the release of conditions, but just to touch very briefly, there are 2 items before you. One is the release of conditions. The other item is when the full BET deliberates the budget for fiscal year 1920, if we could modify the proposed capital sheet by accelerating the payments. Currently, it's proposed at 200,000. If you accelerate it to 800,000, that's the balance due, and that would provide the clawback provision to be actually a working clawback provision rather than the proposed 200,000 for the next several years.
So let me first see if there are questions from committee members on the three areas that were open from our last discussion. Ms. Tarkington?
No, I have,
You're fine.
I'm fine on the issues. I think, I thank the town administrator and the first selectman for getting on top of this and trying to get it accomplished in a timely manner. So I'd say good work. And also, to be very honest, I have more confidence in the fact that Ben was working with Michael Long in the environmental area and Bill Maher, which I don't think had been requested, the second person, rather than Al Manelli. I mean, you've gone directly to the people who would be responsible for the approvals that would be granted in order to proceed with this construction project. So I'm satisfied that the terms have been met. I would just comment on the clawback of the agreement. I mean, Ben, is there a plan to form some kind of a letter agreement or something prior to further disbursements? Or is there a plan for a document that to be completed?
Absolutely. There'll be a formal document signed by the first selectman and representatives of Round Hill. I'm anticipating, although hopefully I'm not planning any ideas, but I'm anticipating the CIP request for 1920 would have conditions placed on it, more than likely, but we can certainly share that document. But the plan is to have a fully signed agreement codifying these business terms plus the traditional terms you put in an agreement.
Well, I'd just like to, may I ask a question?
Yes.
I would just like to understand, because I thought this was part of it. Would any of these funds be dispersed? Again, the first 100,000 has no condition on it. The second 100,000 in the current fiscal year has the condition. Would the document be signed? I would expect the document would have to be signed prior to any disbursement of the additional, of the current year's $100,000. Is that what you're saying, Ben?
No, I anticipate the document being signed after the May vote by the RTM, because then we would have an appropriation of the full project. The 100,000 that we're talking about, a release of conditions, I don't anticipate that being signed prior to the release of the funds in front of you.
So you don't plan any further disbursements of the second 100,000 prior to the approval of the budget in May? I just
No.
want to,
No.
I'm getting confused here. I
Let me
just want to
jump
make
in.
sure
I think what
understand the timing of the
Mr.
document.
Brandon suggested, it's the BET's ability to release the funds. So he's requesting that the outline of the business arrangement, he has identified the key issues in the outline of the business arrangement to the satisfaction of both Round Hill and the town, would ask for us to release the second 100,000 just based on what we're hearing tonight. And then he would anticipate a new condition for the fiscal 20 request project, maybe on the executed contract.
So the additional money that would be used for the actual construction, so before the contract could be signed or something on that idea. Okay, thank you.
That's the proposal.
Okay, thank you for the clarifications, both from Mr. Branyan and Ms. Moriarty.
Mr. Raymond?
So there were three issues that I had raised at the outset. One was the septic, one was the issue of title, and the last was the question of contract. There were some subpoints to it with those three areas. Every transaction, or most transactions, have a measure of business risk. No transaction is completely clean. It was important to me that I be clear on who is stepping forward and making the business decision. And I had stressed that, to my mind, the first selectman, who is also the fire commissioner as well as the chief executive in town, be the authority to make the decision about whether or not acceptable risk existed here and be making an affirmative request to the BET based upon that for the release of funds. I'm being told, I think, by the town administrator that in consultation with the first selectman, you've gathered information about the septic. There may be features of the septic which are not perfect, but the first selectman is making the decision that it's an acceptable risk and is requesting the waiver of that condition. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
The second issue was the question of title, and I was shown that today, for the first time, a different version of the title policy. This policy has affirmative insurance from the Connecticut Attorney's Title Insurance Company that affirmatively insures the property owner against enforcement of the two rights of reversion. That's the first I've seen of that. The copy that we were shown that was in this booklet doesn't have that affirmative insurance, but I'm satisfied with what I saw. To my mind, I think that solves the title issue, and indeed, there's a letter of opinion from the law department to that effect. I think that solves the issue. The last issue is of a contract. I find it frankly a little astonishing that the first selectman is making the affirmative request of us that funding be released in a setting in which there is no contract between the property owners and the town governing that. I mean, theoretically, I suppose the funds could be used then to purchase 4 Corvettes, and as long as they're fire engine red, that's all right. I mean, to me, that's a little remarkable. I have more trouble saying I'll vote to release the funds with that condition not being satisfied. As a matter of respect and goodwill between me and the first selectman, I'll vote that release, but I'm very reluctant, very uncomfortable about that. It seems remarkable to me to have those funds released. When it comes time for the approval of the $200,000 for the upcoming year, which you're now indicating you would like to increase to $800,000, I have already indicated that I would be continuing those 3 conditions. In light of what I've learned today, I'll waive the 2 conditions, but I'll have the inclination as to those 800, 200, whichever the sum proves out to be in the end. I'll probably want to continue the condition on there being a contract entered into between the town and the property owner on terms that are satisfactory to the BET. And I think you're indicating to me, Ben, that that won't interrupt the construction flow. The project is still workable if that condition is in place for those funds. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, there's quite a bit there. Just like if you're done with your questions, I'd like to do one quick response.
Sure.
I'd
I'd be interested in your quick response.
The first 100,000 that was released in 2018, there was no condition placed on that.
I'm aware of that.
The reimbursement is where the Round Hill will submit their request for reimbursement after they've paid, after their chief has signed off on it, then the fire chief for the town submits it to finance for processing. I understand the example you provided about
4 Corvettes.
4 shiny Corvettes.
Fire engine red. Yeah.
That certainly is not in the spirit that we have been working in, the spirit that we continue to work on. And we did not want to be in a position where we would negatively impact the schedule of the project by having a formal contract. That's why we think we got to the meat of the major concerns of contractual. It's a matter of just signing it at this point. We went back for several weeks over those terms. Those were negotiated back and forth. We believe, and I totally understand, and regarding the 800,000, if that happens to be the final number, to have the contract signed prior to the disbursements of that.
And the first selectman is saying to us that he's asking that we support his good faith in his relationship with the fire company to release the 100,000 that's in the current year's budget.
Yes.
I'd like to speak first. I'm taking the discussion, and let me speak next. I disagree with where Mr. Raymer came out on the issue of the contract for much of the reasons Mr. Branyan said. We've been working in good faith with Brown Hill Fire Department. They provide a service to the town. The first 100,000 was not conditioned. I do think we need the management agreement or the development agreement in place prior to the larger construction funding, and look forward to that. I think there are a few other areas which I'm sure we'll reach agreement. I didn't give you comments on some of those before, but when we have a project cost, we have a dollar amount here, but the intent is 50% of the funding. So if it comes in under budget, it should be 50% of the budget, not the dollar amount. I understand that you can't have this contract amount in place, partly because of the funding stream, and the prior recommended project funding stream would have required the volunteer department to get a loan to complete the construction, which is, again, funds not really for the intent of the purpose of providing a service. And so I understand the acceleration of the request. We can talk about that a little bit more. I know you haven't fully presented that now. But I think the intent is mostly agreed to. The letter of it may not be, but I can support release of the conditions at this point, and would probably look to putting a condition on the next fund to make sure that that agreement's in place. Mr. Mason.
So, hello, good evening. You're taking a subject to release and you're sort of rolling us a little bit into a budget decision night with an amendment for next week, so I'm going to try to keep it separate. The original 100,000 was to take us through sort of a feasibility idea and find out what we could and couldn't do, septic issues. Where are we on that? Where are we in the land use process on this project?
With respect to the physical structure and the septic system, we have full approvals. We are formally into wetlands for the approvals there. They are giving us administrative approval on that as soon as we have sign off from one neighbor, which we got yesterday afternoon. So we're in good shape there. As far as the testing that's been done on the septic, that has shown sufficient usage. As far as the capacity of the system, currently we have 5 bunk rooms. The calculations that the health department works through, we could increase that by as many as 7.5 additional people, and we still have the capacity to manage that. So septic is not an issue for us.
Historic district, any other land use agencies that are not in progress or approved?
No, formally, we haven't submitted. We had our informal meetings, as Mr. Brannion referred to, and those went smoothly. In the building department meeting, we talked about a couple of windows that needed to be changed, but nothing of significance for us.
Okay. So out of a $2 million project, what's your percentage of contingency? Guesstimate.
I believe we put in
On
there.
the town side, we have a pretty strict formula we try to follow, whether it's renovation or new.
Yeah,
17.
10%.
So you're at 10%. Okay, so,
Well, wait a second.
go ahead.
Just very quickly, when they submitted their application, the large document, page 51 has the breakdown of the project costs where it shows a 10% contingency.
Right. So I guess my point where I'm going is, has any of the land use approvals changed that?
My last point is, if you increase the accelerate from the 200,000 to 800,000, you make this a $2 million project. It then will, and contingency will be increased to 19%.
Okay, there you go. I had heard it was covered. So that brings me to a point I think Ms. Moriarty was making. So you're asking us now for the release, and I know there's a fundraising side of this, and we're always, not personally, but there's always concerns on the town side where if fundraising's going on and the town comes in, sometimes it deters fundraising, and I'm not sure that's the issue here. When we go to, instead of releasing the 800, because Ms. Moriarty had a question, if this project comes in under budget, and there's not the need for, say, the town side full million, you would be okay if the BET did it, maybe splitting that 800 portion, in portions during that fiscal year?
Well, typically, let me just interrupt because Mr. Geiger has told us in the past when these kinds of projects come up, we usually will reimburse like 50% of provided invoices as the project moves forward, so that we are not getting ahead of the agreed upon contribution.
You're okay with that?
And I think that would work for the Round Hill Department as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Harkington?
Yeah, I just, I want to separate these things a little bit here, too. I mean, we have a release of conditions tonight, and I have no issue with that. I just like to, point out, though, on this agreement that we keep hearing about, that, the Round Hill Fire Company is part of our municipal code. We see them again and again in sections, they're a firehouse or district number 6, et cetera. So, there is a, municipal code kind of charter arrangement with the Round Hill Fire Department. It's not something that's just a distinct 501c3. So I think we all have to keep that in mind. Nevertheless, I would like to see some kind of, and I've said letter agreement. I mean, I do think, and it's my understanding that we always disperse, 50%, so we wouldn't get ahead of it. Quite frankly, I agree with Mike here on the point about contingency and so forth, and I think Leslie can confirm, even when we work together on MISA, having the proper contingency is right. I may be more comfortable, and, again, we're just talking at today's meeting, because we will take I don't believe we take any action on the 800,000. But the way we had this budgeted was really $1 million. But you submit a plan, and we expect that it will be followed and supervised and so forth by the fire department, first selectman's office. But nevertheless, I mean, I would be more comfortable going back to the numbers that are already in our capital plan and making that perhaps $1 million and not the 800,000. Remember, we're always matching what they have put in together. So that's it's just something to think about and consider. I just wanted to raise this. And then, when we get to this construction period, I would like some kind of a letter agreement just to acknowledge those very basic things.
Just to better understand your proposal, is that to better support an over-budget?
Well, no one,
Project?
I hope that this project comes in under $2 million, just the way they're projecting it. I think that's fabulous. But, I mean, I think that if they can do that, that's great, and that's what we all want. And as long as they're also putting in their 50%, with us or ahead of us, I don't imagine that they're going to overspend, and they've given us a plan, and I expect them to keep to it. But we all know that things can happen, and when you deal with older buildings, I know that Al Manelli always likes to have at least a 20% contingency in the older buildings, and when you connect to older buildings. So I think it's just, again, bringing in Al Manelli as Jeff has, just something to think about. I don't rather not have this 800,000 in stone until we get to next Thursday evening.
Okay, I'm just surprised that you're increasing a budget, but that's besides the point.
No,
Okay.
I'm not, wait, make it clear.
No.
And I'm not making, this we have had in our 15-year capital plan over the next 5 years, $200,000 a year. What is being discussed is 800,000, not $1 million. And what we have in our capital plan is $1 million. We've dispersed 100,000 approved in fiscal year 18, 100,000 in fiscal year 19.
Can I just,
Yes.
was the project always 200,000 for the A&E and $1 million for the construction, or was it 800,000 for the construction?
It's $1 million. I can bring my.
Did we see the total cost?
Back in
I don't have a
capital
book
fiscal year
here.
16, we were showing, I think, 200,000 for 6 years. So that would be the 1.2 million.
Okay.
And then in fiscal year 17, we changed the 200 to 100,000, and then now the 100,000 in 19. We did not have a project budget until the formal submission in December of 18. We had the architect's numbers that we were using, but the
So
company.
what's in the capital budget, fiscal 20 capital budget in the out years? What is the project total?
200 per year
For how many years?
for 5 years.
5 years, okay.
So that's why,
It's-
you know,
it's
it's
what
exactly.
your proposal is.
Exactly.
And so what's the, and the reason that then you're presenting 800,000 is because the project cost is lower, or because?
Now,
Well,
now
let me
that we
ask
have
you.
the
So now you have
refined
better
project
numbers.
costs, better numbers, they had a 10% contingency based off of the hard construction cost, which is on the summary page of the executive summary, but also page 51 gives you the detail. They foot to 1,873,000 and change.
Right.
That includes a 10%. If you just remove the contingency and back into $2 million project cost, your contingency then becomes 264,000 and change, which is 19% of the hard construction cost.
Okay.
And
All
then
right,
if you
now I
accelerate the
understand.
money.
And as you heard before, the committee tonight's not going to take action on the revised capital proposal. That will be taken up by the full BET on March 28th. But this information is helping us to be able to craft whatever changes may be proposed that night. So thank you. Any additional questions?
Nope.
Okay, so can I have a motion to recommend the release of conditions on the 100,000 Round Hill Fire Station funds?
So moved.
Any second? Mr. Mason? All those in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Mr. Brandon, for the full BET by Monday, I don't know if this is possible, but could you put together an outline of the management terms of the expected letter agreement? The key provisions that might make, I can talk to you later, but that might make some BET members a little bit more comfortable with what that contract may include. All right, thanks.
In the absence of it on Monday.
Right. That was Tarkington and Mason.
Yes.
The next item on the agenda is, we had a modified, the revised agenda. It's for TAG. And the document was at our places tonight.
Right. Oh, was it at our places? I don't think I
got it at
got
my
my place.
All right, so
But
TAG
I
3.
printed it.
I didn't.
Is there something further revised?
No, I
Okay.
just didn't print it from the computer, so there was, I guess Roland just gave it to me.
Aye.
Do you have that?
Aye, thank you.
I just printed it. It came in an email yesterday.
So the item
I
before
printed
us is a release of condition for the fourth quarter installment of the contribution to TAG and Safe Rise for a total of $73,250. And the condition always reads, review and acceptance by the BET of a quarterly report from TAG regarding operations, personnel, and finances. So would you like to give us the highlights of where you are currently?
Sure, thank you. As we had discussed during our budget presentation, we're well on our way to repairing much of the damage that had, financial damage that had taken place over the past several years at TAG. The repair required a tremendous amount of restructuring, which our 1 year now experienced executive director has shepherded through. It required us to shrink down tremendously from an organization that was much larger at the time that we started this process. But having achieved a current level that is now throwing off cash flow, and I would suggest, as we discussed at our budget meeting as well, the first half of the year we lost on an apples-to-apples basis about $30,000 if we assumed spreading the town funds evenly throughout the year. It's expected that in the second half of the year we will achieve positive cash flow of about $40,000 for a net $8,000 positive cash flow and profit for the year. And our expectation is a plan for the forthcoming year that is targeted at a 50,000 plus bottom line for the full year.
Has there been any substantive changes since we spoke, 3 weeks ago, or I'm not sure exactly when, but have they, so you gave us a very detailed plan of what you expect for the fourth quarter and going into next year. Anything changed since that last conversation?
So there was a question that came up with respect to the ability to achieve revenues in the plan, and our first pass at the plan expected a substantial growth target. Our expectation is we can achieve that same level of plan with a level of revenues that is consistent with the current run rate of revenues. And we presented that to the RTM Transportation Committee, and we can also provide a copy of that same plan to the BET Budget Committee and full BET as well. But it is consistent with our current run rate of revenues, and therefore we believe is even more achievable than the plan which was questioned, which was our first pass at that.
So let me ask my committee members, any questions of Mr. Miller?
No, I think, it's great, your progress, and you've devoted an awful lot of time to this, I know, and so thank you for devoting your time to a 501c3 that's needed in town. And also, it's needed to, sort of stem the losses that the town has been funded, so it's very much appreciated.
Just
Mr. Mason?
on your P&L for July 18th through February 19th, if I'm reading this correctly, your donations are up and your grant from United Way are up. Those are the two biggies, which are what we had to close, and it seems operationally you're holding your own otherwise. So that's the big change, correct? Which is what we knew all along, right?
Well, we certainly needed to have additional revenues, but combined with that, if you take a look at the run rate of our expenses in particular for last year, we came out of the year at a run rate of about 1.3 million in expenses, and we're currently, for the second half of this current year, at a run rate of about $800,000. So that was a much larger reduction in expenses that allowed us to get to where we are today. We definitely needed to grow revenues, but even more so, we had to restructure and reduce expenses.
I compliment you. It's been, we've had a lot of time together at this, and I hope the public knows how hard you've worked to do this. And Ben, you're involved. Everybody's been involved in this, so that's a year makes a big difference.
Thank you very much. For everybody that's been involved with this, our full board, the management of TAG, our sole focus is to make sure that the town continues to get the service that the town certainly has received over the past 30 years. And it is our hope that we're financially capable and management capable of providing a continuing level of service for the next 30 years and beyond.
Mr. Raymer?
So on the run rate, I just want to understand how you calculate on the run rate. If I stop the clock right now, or stop the clock at the end of February, whichever you like, so that I've asked you not to give consideration to further improvements that you're looking forward to over the remaining 3 or 4 months that remain in this fiscal year, are you running on budget at this point?
Yes,
Are you running a little ahead of budget at this point?
we're running on budget.
On
I'm
budget.
not going to go ahead of budget at this
Okay,
point.
but on your burn rate, you're running right at your budget.
We're
at this point.
exactly where we need to be to achieve our slightly above break even for the full year.
And your optimistic remarks from before suggest to me that you don't see any bad news likely to come at you over the next 3 to 4 months that would put you in a net deficit position by the end of the current fiscal year.
The only two concerns, if you will, that could prevent us, and we're talking about probably 20 to 30,000 range, is our ability to achieve our fundraising targets for the year. And it's wonderful for you to mention this because we have our annual fundraiser coming up a week from this Friday. It is at Gabrielle's, and it is very critical for us to ensure that that fundraiser achieves its targets so that we can achieve our fundraising target for the year. The other at-risk item, we received our first pass of United Way funds, and relative to what we had put together in our plan, we still expect to be at or around where we need to be, and if we get a little less, we're hopeful to make it up in our fundraising
Your
as well.
paperwork showed that you received 20,000 from last year and that you're expecting or have already received 30,000 for this year. Are those funds you actually received, or is that an expectancy, or is that?
No, the 30,000 is what is committed
Right.
and what already has been received. So it is pledged and or received.
One last question. I noted that there was a large increase in your premium on the insurance.
Mhm.
Is that just a change in the marketplace, or was there some event that might have triggered that in the operation of an accident or something of that sort?
Our real estate representatives who help us place insurance went through a tremendous process last year, reason being not primarily due to anything that was related to our loss experience, but predominantly related to what was going on in the marketplace. And what we were told is, particularly with the commercial auto lines, the market fell out of bed. Apparently, losses across the auto market were very severe, and as a result, premiums across the board, not just for TAG,
Are
but
you,
for
are you
others.
right at the cusp of the next renewal, that there might be a further disappointment in
We-
these next 4 months that you
We
don't
are
know
at the
about?
cusp, and we were told to expect basically no change from the prior year, which the prior year was a tremendous increase.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have no other questions. Thank you, by the way, Mike.
No other
Yeah.
questions.
And Mrs.
Can
Detrimental, too.
I get a motion to recommend release of the conditions for 73,250?
I'll
Mr.
second.
Mason?
I'll second that.
Parkington, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
4-0. Thank you, and again, congratulations on making it through the year and for all the services you provide for the
Yeah.
town.
Thanks very much. We couldn't have done it without the BET and the committee. Thank you very much.
The next item on the agenda, let me just have one housekeeping item.
Yeah.
It's now 6:30. We have 4 Board of Ed items to discuss and 1 Bruce Museum. And I know that Mr. Fox has a 7 p.m. P&Z meeting.
I would move that we take, with apologies to the Board of Ed people who've been waiting very patiently, I would move that we take the
Bruce
the
Museum item
presentation
next.
from the Bruce Museum out of turn.
And then I'll let the Board of Ed consider what order you want those other items to be, if you want to take the discussion item first or whatever, but thank you for your consideration.
And
So
I
I've got a
second, second Jeff's.
second motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
So,
I figured Nancy always get that.
thank you for coming. This is a discussion item. This is really education for BET members as we're trying to finalize the fiscal 20 budget. The request from Bruce Museum for the HVAC capital project currently in the budget is sitting at $525,000, I think.
575.
I looked at what our votes were, and I think it might have been
A
done
typo.
even lower.
So,
But,
yeah, Angela had sent to me a request for 575, said it was
575,
voted
okay.
on 575, and that was what was submitted
Right.
in a revised CIP sheet.
And as explained to you, it was the Budget Committee's majority vote to move with the replacement in kind, and I understand why that may cause an issue for Bruce Museum, so we said maybe it's a good idea to come back, have another conversation about it, so we can get better informed on the issue.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to come back and speak. And I brought with me, as you mentioned, Andy Fox, who the Bruce Museum has been relying on really, really heavily for all of our construction projects moving forward. And so I think technical questions could probably be answered better by Andy than by me.
So Suzanne, where we left off, I think, at our last meeting, was that you gave us the one bid for whatever it was, 575, maybe. But you also expected another bid in from another entity that you've been working with on the replacement, or whatever we want to call it. And did you ever receive that? Because I don't believe that was forwarded to us.
It was not forwarded to you. We did not receive it with any backup documentation. We got a number that was not supported with any itemized items, and it failed to outline what was included. So we spoke to Andy about it, and he said, you can't share this with the BET. There's no support documentation. So that's where we left that. And that was, again, that was after we met the first time and after my submission to you with the revised CIP sheet.
And was that the same organization, or corporation, whatever it was, that you had mentioned the name to us before, and you're not willing to share the number with us? Is that the idea? Because it didn't have backup?
It doesn't have any backup. I don't think it's a valid bid. I really don't.
Okay.
So I'm not interested in sharing it, and I would prefer not to mention the name of the entity again. I'm not quite sure if he wants the work. There were several back and forths with me and this particular gentleman, and it was mostly unresponsive.
So really, the consideration or the discussion that we had and was that the replacement in kind, so that the town has the obligation and the commitment to assist with the maintenance of the existing building. We know that the Bruce Museum has wonderful plans for expansion. And so when this project cost came in, and there's such a huge difference between a replacement in kind and a system that would work better with the new expansion, it raises the concern of really what's the town's obligation in that particular instance. And so the judgment that we had 2 weeks ago was that the funding should be at the replacement in kind and not for the higher performing system that would work in conjunction with the expansion. So tell us why that's not the right approach.
Well, I think, first of all, besides the building, the town is the owner of all the artwork, which right now is worth
$30 million.
$30 million. And so here you have an artwork collection that is being stored, whether it's in the gallery or in the basement, with a system that's 25 years old and wasn't designed for the new criteria. So we would appreciate the money to be put into a new system that meets the new museum standards, and replacing what's in kind, quite frankly, won't help the museum because it won't meet the new requirements for when you take collections for exhibits.
There's no expectation here on our part. When we first had the conversation with Suzanne, the suggestion to us was that the cost to replace the existing system, it's a hypothetical, nobody was talking about actually replacing the existing system, would run between $300,000 to $500,000. I'm going to try and put a prettier face on the whole thing, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
And that's seldom my role, but I'm going to try and do that here. In fact, when the bids were put forward, and they're really sort of hypothetical bids, we're getting bids for a piece of work that nobody was planning to do, it came to $575, and the feeling, if I could say so candidly, was that it was reasonably generous of us then to leave behind the $300 to $500 and say, let's call it $575. There was no intent here to do the harshness and say, we're not going to replace the system. You're doing a capital project that's going to replace the system. Under our agreement, capital projects are your business and not our obligation. Our obligation is only maintenance. And since you're doing a maintenance that's going to absolve us of the need to have to replace the air conditioning system, which would have been our responsibility, since you're doing it, great, I'm glad you're doing it. You've relieved us of that $575,000 worth of expense. There's no desire here to do that. On the contrary, we think it's a spectacular project you're doing. And we think, tally-ho, we'd like to see you do that and have that work. And so we've stepped forward and said, to help you do that piece of work, instead of just leaving you do the whole project, we would like to chip in $575,000 because that's what we would have paid to replace the air conditioning system if you weren't doing the capital project. So I'm trying to invite a smile from you to say that we're giving you more than $500,000
Yeah.
worth of assistance
No.
on something that we really don't need to do.
I want to make sure that we're very clear that about the funds, about their use, and about what that would mean. So if we were to replace in kind, which is what my understanding was that this body wanted to do, the Bruce Museum, when we expand, does not have a system that can integrate with our new system. And so those would be ripped out in 2 to 3 years. And so that would be an investment of over $500,000 from this body that would then be ripped out. And so it was our intent to look at a longer lasting solution, something that would go 25 years or greater yet again, that would integrate with the new system, that would provide us with the appropriate environment for a museum and not risk our accreditation.
Respectfully, Suzanne, you can't do the project you're doing with us merely making that replacement. Your whole system then won't work. There's only one way for you to do the project, and a capable guy like Andy Fox would be the first person to tell you that, is you're going to have to junk the existing system, do the physical renovation, and put a new system in that's capable of doing climate control on the whole thing. Nevertheless,
yes.
we recognize that under our contract, our commitment to you, I don't like contract, our commitment to you, contract's being a dirty word here today.
It's a management agreement.
Our arrangement with you is that our obligation of maintenance is to step forward and replace a system if it fails, such as the air conditioning system. And had you not been doing the project, we would be incurring that $575,000 cost. And it's what motivates us to want to make that contribution to your project. But I don't think that it's to stay to the letter of our agreement, our commitment to you. I don't think it's appropriate to say that, well, your whole air conditioning system, your whole HVAC system, at $1,769,000, I think was the number, is our obligation, because the greater part of that is actually your capital project, which under our arrangement is your expense, not ours.
So I would argue that that's not entirely the case. The capital project is actually, it's much larger than that. And in fact, it was never our intent to do this first. The failure of the HVAC has forced a change in the way in which we are phasing the project. So I would argue that in order to have a museum environment for the existing museum, whether we expand or no, we need to have a functioning system that can not only maintain the temperature as we discussed, but the relative humidity is really what's killing us right now. And to have 13 individual residential units on the roof, it's not cutting the mustard. It's just, we can't keep maintaining it any longer at this stage.
So I think the question, what I'm listening to you is, you're not mandating it go for the replacement. We would have the opportunity to pay for the more expensive system, and we could use those funds to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm just, for clarification.
I can only speak for myself, but that's my understanding exactly.
I will speak in addition to, I think that probably if that were to be done, or you want that alternative, it would be very helpful if you put together a letter to that effect so that there's something else to be included in case anyone wants to make any changes next Thursday. But, I mean, I think that what Jeff has said makes some sense, that, you know, if you want a bigger system for your expanded project, but don't want to do, is something to consider.
Well, there are two issues. One is, right now, the current design replacement is in the basement. And under the future plan, that space is turning into storage, temperature control storage for artwork. So putting it down there in the long term doesn't. So one of the reasons it was 1.7, there was a structural component to the price that you saw, of about, $256,000, and then the HVAC and electrical was around 800,000 not marked up. And then there was a 40% contingency, but when we had a week to put the number for the request, I'd rather be conservative than now. And so right now, the total cost for the roofs, just HVAC and electrical plumbing for that, with contingency, is about $800,000. No structural.
Can you repeat again what the 800,000 represents?
Putting the system on the roof, museum quality, controls, and you have to realize the boilers are in the basement, so to get the heat up to the roof, we have plumbing to get to the roof. That is about after value engineering, it was about $1.1 million. We value engineered that down to about 800,000.
But that's not a replacement of that's not intended to represent the cost of replacing the existing system. It's intended to be the cost of producing an upgraded system that would do the weather control in the basement and the like, but a project that you're not actually going to do because of the larger renovation.
Yes. I mean, we could split hairs about controls and electric and more ductwork to provide, but, you know, the real number is 800,000. So
So tell me, I'm sorry, I keep asking the same question different ways, and I'm having difficulty understanding it. What's the difference between the 800,000, a bid, they said it exists as a bid, and and what we were told at 575? The
Well,
575 we were told would be if hypothetically we were to go to replace the existing system with an analogous system at today's pricing for the building as it exists today without physical renovation, that would cost about $575.
Correct.
The system at 800,000, describe to me again, what is that that's different from the
museum
575?
quality in terms of HEPA filters, humidity, both in the summer and in the winter. And that doesn't include what the museum is doing to protect the envelope to make the humidity.
I didn't even get into that.
Okay, you probably way too much information.
So the $800,000 system is, again, hypothetical replacement of the existing system for the existing building, but it's a system that is a higher quality system appropriate to handle a museum.
Your collections.
Without promises to you, could I recommend to you that you gather and submit to us something in the nature of a bid along those lines?
I can get quotes from Turner, yeah.
So I'm
No, no, I don't
confused
mean
now.
a bid, it's a quote,
What-
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've used the wrong expression.
So I'm confused. Why wasn't that what we got last week, whatever it was, 2 weeks ago maybe, week and a half, was
2 weeks ago.
$1.8 million, more or less? So,
$1,769,000, but that's.
well, that rounds to $1.8 million.
That was
So-
the
so-
original,
It
that
was-
was the original proposal that I've got in front of. And in that original proposal, because I've heard loud and clear you don't want to pay for structure, there was $256,000 of roof structure. There's roughly $290 for plumbing, electric, and fire protection. And there was $653,000 for HVAC. And then there was 40% contingency. We have gotten the plumbing, electric, and the HVAC down to about 650,000, and I added 25% on top of that, and I rounded it down to 800.
But that's an HVAC system for the larger improved building.
No, that's
that's
for
not
just for the, sorry. So the HVAC, as I said earlier, if the total cost was $1.2 million plus markup, the HVAC portion was about $950,000 with electric.
And just to answer Jeff's question, it was always the project, if I understood the project sheets, was always addressing just the current building. It just would work with whatever new systems put in for the new building.
Correct.
And we're now getting a reduced price. I don't know whether you're paying for structural changes on top of this?
We're paying on top of this structural, interiors. I mentioned that one of the issues with the humidity is the exterior wall breathes too much. And so we are getting too much moisture transmission behind the walls, and we're spending about $250,000 to produce a moisture barrier between the floor, the ceilings, and the exterior walls to keep the humidity control at museum standards.
And the idea was and I think this is what confused the committee earlier, since the Bruce Museum is going to have to do those replacements to those walls and tear those walls anyway, that the Bruce Museum board decided to change the order of operations for the project and spend $1.1 million in renovating while this is going on.
Logical. Mr. Mason, any questions?
I think for our workshop on Wednesday, we need a very short set of notes on this
Okay.
item before it comes to decision.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Fox or Ms. Leo?
I'm only going to echo what Mr. Mason said. We're going to gather as a full BET on Wednesday to have some dialogue back and forth and exchange ideas. And this is a public session. It would be helpful to us. You've got a lot to do. You devote a lot of time. I appreciate it. But if we could have from you some further materials and documentation so we could understand thoroughly what you're saying to us, that might be helpful to you.
Is that
Just-
tomorrow?
The
No,
I'm sorry, a week
28th.
from Wednesday.
Next
wait.
week.
I didn't know.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
no, a week from
After
Wednesday.
P&Z
Yeah.
tonight.
And I know
Oh,
you have
yes.
P&Z tonight, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, with that, thank you very much
We'll
for coming
try to
back.
get it to you
Appreciate
by
the new
Monday.
information.
We will, and thank you very much
So
for the
we can
opportunity
distribute it.
to address your questions again. I'm sorry that this is,
No.
the Bruce Museum appreciates our relationship, but we know that it's a very complicated one, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
taking
again.
us out of order.
And thank you for all you do for the town.
So I made the offer to the Board of Education. There are 4 additional items on the agenda. Do you have a particular order you want to take them in? Okay, so can I have a motion to move the discussion of Cardinal Stadium?
So moved.
Next on the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Oh, it's,
The budget chairs. Okay. Yeah, well, I think I'm being sucked along too, actually. But I want to ask you a few questions. I'm sure I understand. Thank you.
So, so this agenda item, we've asked the Board of Ed, because there was discussion on January 31st when you came before the Budget Committee about all of the items in operating and capital. We talked about Cardinal Field at that point. The Budget Committee took an action on March 1st to change the scope of the proposed project, to reduce the scope. And the Board of Ed has since looked at the project again and has an alternate proposal that was voted on at their board meeting last week. And so we added the discussion item to have a further sharing of information about the Cardinal Stadium project and what the proposal is for fiscal 20 and beyond. This is a discussion tonight. The action on this would be at the full BET on March 28th on the full budget vote, but this is to get us prepared to be able to move forward on that evening. Thank you. With that, Mr.
All right,
Bernstein.
well, thank you for letting us come back. I want to thank Mr. Turner and Ms. Fasliotis, who's in the back, for coming and listening in on our meeting. I think we got an earful while they were there. After you took action, the Cardinal Stadium Committee meeting met with our architect, Russ Davidson, who's here now with the plan.
Mr. Davidson.
So we can
I'm
walk
I'm
you
sorry,
through
who's with you, please?
Mr.
Russ
Davidson.
And then Lorianne O'Donnell, our
Oh,
operating
no.
officer, and Dan Watson, our master of facilities.
Master of Facilities.
Is that the new title?
Yeah, I think
I
so.
looked it up.
Did salary come with it?
No, there's no
okay.
salary involved. We'd have to come to the HR committee.
And it does, Russ Davison is with,
KG&D,
okay, thank you,
Kmart, Garment, and
our
Davidson.
external firm,
Architects.
exactly.
thank you.
So the Cardinal Stadium Committee took up the discussion where you left off, basically looking at different ways of doing the plan, phasing over time, some odds and ends, and then that was presented to our board on Thursday night, passed by our boards. It's before you now. I know you had a couple of questions, and I don't know if, Russ, you want to walk them through the
Thank you.
phasing first, maybe as a way to get this started.
So we met with the committee and we talked about taking a 2-year plan, making it a 3-year plan, starting predominantly with phase 1. So phase 1 is pink. Purple. So basically focusing on the bleachers and related work. Phase 2 is relocation of tennis courts. Most of the site work will be bridge, wetlands mitigation, and the new driveway and parking. And then phase 3 is buildings. And each phase now is designed to be standalone so that you could, if you want to stop, you would have something that's usable. Otherwise, we were talking about an ongoing construction project of a similar length. This really changes things. A couple of things that were added at request was the provision of a temporary toilet building in phase 1. So that would be sort of a better version of the temporary toilet that we have now, about the same capacity as stalls. It would be handicap accessible. Also in phase 1 is the replacement of the lighting fixtures only on the existing poles. This is not in the scope of the earlier Cardinal Stadium budget that was taken out as a separate project. The other thing that's sort of an additional cost is, obviously when you do phase 2, if you're going to stop, we need to do something in this area where the buildings are. So there's a little bit of overlap because you're going to be treating portions of the site more than once. It's a couple $100,000 we budget, but that is an added cost that will be continued on in the construction project. And the other addition to the overall cost is just relative to the most expensive phase, the buildings is now going further out, so additional cost escalation for the building phase. So it can be done this way, and we end up with something that's usable in each phase. So when we met with the committee, we talked about in phase 1, putting the hard and soft costs for phase 1 into phase 1, and a portion of the design costs for phase 2 into phase 1, so that you can move smoothly to the next phase. And similarly, in phase 2, the remainder of the soft costs, all the hard costs, and the design costs for phase 3 are in phase 2. This keeps you ahead of the game, and if you don't do it that way, then the 3-year plan actually becomes a 6-year plan. You have a lot of cost escalation. A couple things that have developed is the press box is considered floor area and would trigger a variance to the high school property because it's increased floor area. You do need the site plan approved to do even phase 1. So you need to go to planning and zoning. And so phase 1 is sort of front-loaded with engineering fees to do the whole site plan application process, which I can remind you involves some wetlands mitigation, construction of a vehicle and pedestrian bridge. So
Can I ask what triggers the requirement of the site plan?
moving things around.
So even just the movement of the bleachers close to the field then requires, and if we really wanted to make each phase independent, the site plan requirement for just the bleachers and press box is much smaller than the site plan requirement for the whole site.
However, that would technically be correct, but however, I think in discussing with P&Z staff, they've made abundantly clear to come in with the overall site plan, because they know that this is not one piece and you're walking away. This is one piece of a anticipated project.
So at what point doesn't, so phase one doesn't require MI, I would think.
It does.
It does.
Katie Lucas said it does because we're adding parking behind the bleachers.
Concerned about the complexity of the project and the burden on the Board of Ed staff. So that's kind of one of the filters I'm thinking about all of this information
Well,
through.
we wouldn't be moving forward with it if we didn't think it could be done.
So I am totally confused now. We're approached with a project to redo the stadium seats in our capital budget. And I thought that, what we were doing was replacing something that was at risk. And we thought that these stadium seats weren't going to require MI. If we did only stadium seats, again, the same way, which we thought first was $1 million, then it was $1.1 million, then it was $1.3 million, would that have required MI?
So Leslie, first, this has always been part of a larger project. This has been very open in the community. We've held public forums. Our board voted on it, and if you look at the
Right,
capital-
but I'm
But
asking.
hang on, Leslie, let me finish, please. This has absolutely been a larger project. This is also predicated on the fact that those bleachers need replacing. However, there are other challenges with that stadium site in terms of there are no team rooms, there are no bathrooms, no handicap bathrooms. We have a safety and security and just basic traffic flow issue at the high school. This is to resolve multiple problems. This is not just about replacing a set of bleachers. The specific question is about whether you need MI to replace the bleachers. We are moving the bleachers up closer to the field for better viewing. There's going to be a handicapped accessible area at the front of the bleachers. That requires an MI, regardless of what else you might be doing. So you got to go down this road. This has been a plan that's been in the works for a while. There's community support for this. As one of our board members said, regardless of whether students are playing in athletics or not, every student graduates from Cardinal Stadium. Every student. This is a centerpiece for our community. It has been in disrepair for too long. Quite frankly, the field hockey team plays there, the soccer teams play there, the football team plays there, track and field goes on
Let's
there.
talk about the proposal in front of us, because I think the.
Sure, but I want to make sure we're not talking about just replacing bleachers, because I'm a little disappointed that seems to be the center of the conversation. That we continue to come with our plan for a master to fix the stadium and the facility, and what we're hearing is the bleachers, only the bleachers. The bleachers are 40-plus years old. The bleachers are shored up. They definitely pose a risk and they need to be replaced. That is the first phase of the work, rightfully so. There are other aspects to this. The first phasing of the project, the request that's before you now that our board voted on last week to update our capital request, is to enable the future work, right? It's to enable this project. I can talk about the lights too, because we've gotten the opinion from town council. We can replace the light fixtures on the poles as long as they meet the other requirements of the stipulation that's out there. We are having a hard time finding light poles. Basically, the fixtures can't be moved. They're old, they're fragile. They need to be replaced. Modern equipment is out there and available.
Just to set the discussion really from our perspective, we understand that you've been working on this for a long time and that there's been a committee formed. There was a BET representative on that committee. That doesn't necessarily mean that the project moves forward the way that you would like, the way that you would envision. And I'm not indicating what any of my colleagues' votes might be on this project. However, this is the first time it's come to the BET for funding. It came to us with a funding request of $17 million over 2 years, and that's the first time that we have heard about the project. So we're having the conversation
Well,
now.
Back up a second, Leslie. You actually gave us money to move forward with the design work. So this is not
$260,000.
exactly already
That's right.
in the
Okay.
budget before. So this is not the first time. And
You're right.
And that budget, when we discussed it, is about doing all of the aspects of this project that have come forward in this plan. The road, the team rooms, the replacement of the bleachers. I think the only difference is the lights. And that's just a recent development
right.
with the town legal department. So everything else has been something we've been discussing
Right, so
for some
it's,
time.
it's been around, we've necessarily been aware of the idea, not necessarily the timing, the scope, the dollars. Last time it was in the plan, it was at 5 million too, because there was a lot of talk about a public-private partnership. I
And-
don't
and there
think-
still is, and
I
I
don't
can-
think any of us believed the project cost $5 million when it was in the last year's budget at that dollar level. So now we have more information, more dollars. But that's 5 million was what was in the capital plan, right? So that's, it
was a
just, it's a
placeholder.
different conversation.
So there's a slight disconnect, and all parties here need to take a deep breath and recognize that it come from a different place a bit. In fairness, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with Mrs. Tarkenton's characterization of, I thought this was just bleachers. It came to us for $17.5 million worth of new money, $8.4 million of it in the upcoming year, for a fairly dramatic option B among the various options that were looked at. I believe that you had three options. I wasn't so close to it, three options, and this was the, kind of the middle of the road. There was one that was a bit less, and there was one that was still more dramatic. But by any measure, in fairness, be kind to us. This is a fairly dramatic project and not an inexpensive project. So it came to us as this full vote, and you actually haven't shifted. There was a vote here among the four of us that this is too rich a bite for us, and we changed it to be, gee, what about just bleachers? And we manufactured the number of $1.3 million, knowing full well that we were on soft ground on manufacturing that figure, and we were open to information from you about what are the real numbers. We're not sure that we're in the right neighborhood. You've come back to us in a fairly dogged way. You're staying in your posture. You're still on option B. There's been no rescaling of what you're doing. What you're doing is you've phased it over 3 years. I've heard from Mr. Davidson that if we're not careful about how we handle the A&E components, we could manage to manufacture this into a 6-year project. You're frightening me, Mr. Davidson. Those numbers always get bigger. You've got some figures in here in the math that we see. I don't know if Mr. Davidson had a chance to see the figures that you shared with us or whether or not he, in fact, was the source of them. There's some there that didn't understand. I didn't understand, for example, why I've got $216, I think it was, $1,000 of increase based upon delay when that $216,000 is in the first year. There is no delay in the first year. But so there's figures I didn't really quite fully understand. But what's happening is it's still the full option B. But if I want to phase it, I'll make the $17.5 million project into an $18.5 million project, round numbers, including the consequence of what it is to do the phasing. I do appreciate very much Mr. Davidson saying he's phased it in such a way that if we were strong-minded about it, we could stop at a given phase. We could do just phase 1, or we could just phase 1 and 2, or we could do phase 1, 2, and 3. I suppose that means that we can also spread them out to different years, although costs do accelerate as you do it. But I do appreciate the cleverness of Mr. Davidson to have been doing this in a way that I have options to move forward or not move forward, take a deep breath, take a year off, and come back to things. I know it's not what you want to hear, but at least I feel like I'm getting cooperative options. Now, what I'm not really getting is other options. Gee, we could do a less grand project. I'm seeing real affection of the school board, real affection of school administration for option B. You really kind of want to do it, and I'm really not seeing a lot of options. I'm seeing just option B. I'm seeing option B turned on its head. I've seen it lying on its side, but it's always option B coming at me. Am I right about that?
You're correct, Jeff, because a lot of thought has actually gone into this. It's our responsibility to make sure we have adequate facilities. Our ask is to fund this as it's planned, which would be phased over 3 years. Your job is to decide whether you can finance that and how you might do that.
Yeah, and
so it's a roles and responsibilities challenge that we seem to be having today.
And we're popping Tums and finding it all a little rich, but
look,
our heart is with you. It's a more ambitious plan than maybe we were hoping to see, but we recognize why you're coming there, et cetera.
So I'm not sure I completely agree that it's more ambitious. I think that it represents all of the goals that were set out at the beginning of this project, right? So it solves traffic and safety flow out of the high school. It solves for the lack of ADA accessible facilities, proper team rooms. If a player is injured right now on the field, if a female player is injured right now on the field, they have to be transported back to the school. There's no facility right there for them to be looked at. So you actually, if you've ever been to a sporting event at the half, they will actually go all the way back into the school. I don't know if the distance is about a half mile.
No, it's not
It's
that
a quarter
far,
mile.
but it's-
I don't know what it
okay,
is,
but it's
but
a
basically you
distance,
have to
yeah.
extend out the period between the break and the game. It just is. It's a facility that is in need of a fresh up. This is the reasonable fresh up, right? This is not just about slapping bleachers and a coat of paint on things. This is a thoughtful plan to do this over time. Doing this over 3 years doesn't really satisfy the entire community's wish, who wishes this were done quicker and were the grander plan. But this is, I think, what is needed there. It is what's responsible to be there, and it really meets the needs that we set out. As to the public-private partnership, because that was brought up, I can't commit an outside organization to an amount of money. Mr. Kroll was here. I don't know if he had to go. He had to go from the GAF. They're committed to helping raise money for this. They want to know that there's a project to raise money for. And that's our challenge, right? We're trying to move forward.
So I have a little chicken and egg with that, Peter, because there, I'm sorry to interrupt, but a little chicken and egg with that, because not for me personally. I generally support the project, but I believe there's reluctance in other quarters, and some of the disappointment is the failure of the public-private partnership to emerge. There's a feeling that once the town steps forward and undertakes to fully fund something, if that's what the town does, then it becomes very difficult to raise money to replace what the town committed, so the town will then spend less. The belief is there'll be an attitude there, well, the town's undertaken to pay it, so we're done.
Well,
And they'll then do their fundraising for a different project.
Right, but the technicality is you actually have to approve all the money. So you have to approve the full funding for the project. You can condition it upon receipt of additional funds.
Exactly.
And given that this is phased, it actually gives them an opportunity. If
Yeah,
they're
but
interested in.
on other projects, whether you're talking about the Byram Pool or other projects that you're, I'm sure, familiar with, indeed, we did approve funds conditioned upon, and no funds were released, and we watched funds being raised, we watched pledges being converted into checks, et cetera, and at the critical moments, we were releasing funds. I mean, we dealt with that quite differently than this is being dealt with.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference. These plans have not been concrete. And, quite frankly, the vote you took last week hasn't helped us in discussions with them because they don't believe it's happening. So.
Okay, Ms. Tarkington?
Do you want Again, I was talking before, and I guess we moved on beyond me. But anyway, I think that was part of the problem with this project, was approving the front-end money for the front-end fees to, do the analysis, and needs to be thought in terms of the full site and what happens next in terms of our remediation and the attention to making sure that we're proceeding. Every time we come up with any project, and equally it was the, eastern side of the GHS MESA project. It delays the overall, approvals, because that becomes, the project of the moment. But, just to kind of remind people, we do have a process for MI that the town uses. And Katie visited with us, on her, Katie DeLuca, on her own budget, planning and zoning, and once again reiterated to this board when the questions were asked that the MI process should basically reiterate what you used so successfully at New Lebanon. And, I have here in front of me a copy of the structure of that condition. And it basically takes the money and the front end money and it lays it out in terms of getting environmental, wetlands, other testing done. And that will have to be done on this project, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's got explicit identification of the scheme that's already been done, but then there's the MI process, et cetera. So I think perhaps what, as I understood it, because I never actually saw underlying numbers of what we approved, was a project that would mitigate any risks in terms of the stadium seating, et cetera, in the upcoming year. And that seemed to me a very good way of moving ahead. And yes, sometimes it costs us a bit more money, but it's also it's going to take time to go through the process for the rest of this here. I guess I didn't realize that the seats, perhaps I wasn't properly advised, that the seats would be moved and then MI would be required even for that project. But it was a way to at least move ahead on a section of the project, and then obviously not say that's the end of the project. But it's going to take a while to get all of this done, and to me, that was a way, when it was presented to me, it's not something I came up with, as a way of a positive step ahead. And so I'm a little surprised at your reaction, both as a board and then, this evening at this meeting, because that was never my intent when I supported the stadium seats. So I do think that, be happy to have Roland and Pete, send you the MI structure and so forth, which you must be very familiar with anyway, Peter, but, as a way to move ahead. And, one more question, and I'm sorry that I didn't recognize Russ Davidson's name because I do have it here on the letter, but we see a lot of people here. Has he been on this project ever since the project started, when the group was formed and so
Yes.
forth? So there's a continuity there.
Absolutely.
So, okay. I mean, I just, again, I trying to work with the process and move things ahead more rapidly. I think that this plan will be much slower in terms of.
Can I
the
just
moving.
ask a follow-up? Because if your support continues on what you had indicated previously, which is bleacher replacement, which you're now hearing may require some additional design work in MI, would you be asking for what that would cost, that particular part of the project, or how would you propose moving forward?
Well, I think that's a good point. I think that, again, I think, quite frankly, the easier how do we put this constructively? A project that requires a minimum amount of soil disruption. I mean, I read this letter and I was actually quite alarmed when I read it. Probably is going to be your most rapid project to get done, and I'm willing to understand. I certainly take the little process here, and they should look at it. But I think, Leslie, it's a good idea to have you come back and take the stadium seats part of it. But again, I don't know about this MI. It seems to me the simpler it is, the faster it will get
So
done.
let me just clarify, because I'm not proposing a specific alternative here, but I do think BET members need to have, if there is going to be a change to what's fully proposed here, to understand where the costs are and the breakdowns and what can work, what can move forward and what can't. And I don't want to create a lot of extra work, but in the lack of information, the wrong decisions sometimes get made. So just with that as a background.
That's
before-
fine, but I do want to make something clear. Leaving the bleachers where they are is not the right project. So let's be abundantly clear about that. Anybody that sat in the first couple of rows of the bleachers, you're removed from the field. You can't see actually over the students sometimes, and there's no handicap seating. You just can't go with the configuration you have. So to do this right, you've got to move things around. That's just a necessity here.
No,
But I understand you're
that.
looking for broken down costs.
Yeah. And
I just want to elaborate a little bit on it. The bleachers are broken, 40 years old, and in the wrong place. Let's be clear. They were moved there. They weren't constructed. They were moved there from another field before you built the synthetic turf. So the bleachers predate the field. The relationship to the bleachers to the field is wrong. And 20 feet further back from the field than you'll see in any other high school or college stadium.
Is that relocation what drives the MI, or is it
Part of it.
the
because
parking?
It's a good thing, because you move them forward.
Right.
You get handicapped access to the front. You get better sight lines for everyone, and you get parking behind them, and a road behind them.
Is that,
Without disturbing any additional area, because we're working within the current disturbed area.
and I understand Mr. Mason has a question, but let me ask one question on this road concept, because right now that's not a legal access out to Route 1. So by putting,
It's an existing curb cut.
but by putting parking there, would the high school be able to move
Not during the
cars in
day,
and out?
not during the day as it's configured. You could use that for handicap parking for games, which we don't have. If you've ever been there, you see them bringing people over on golf carts.
And we have police at all our games, so they could, you know, if they need.
And that
we
would
need
be
someone-
permitted. I don't
And
know the
part of
regulations.
reason we need site plan approval is so we can look at this holistically. But
I know.
the data to date on soil in this area does not indicate contamination. Okay? So that, obviously that needs to be tested again, but we're talking about footings that are 4 and 5 feet deep. We're not talking about massive cut and fill. And you're gonna have to do them no matter where the bleachers go. Whether they move forward or they go right back where they are, they need new footing. So you're disturbing soil no matter what you do. And testing will be done, and there's no reason to believe soil in this area is the same as soil in the other areas. All the tests say that it's not, but you don't know until you test it.
I don't believe we've tested that deep over there, have we? And we've only tested for certain things.
Okay, that's,
I just want to point out one other thing about the overall process, because we've been involved with the Cardinal Stadium feasibility study for a while now. We've got 17 meetings, many of which were public. The reason option B was selected is because that is a road and a parking lot out to Route 1. That's, everyone who saw that, including a lot of people in this room, town officials, planning, fire department, and police, said, this is an excellent feature. This makes the high school safer. This makes access to the games better. It'll allow team buses to come in and drop off and even turn around and leave by the parking lot or turn around and leave by Route 1. It gets handicapped parking next to the bleachers. It connects these two parking areas, giving you 74 additional parking spaces at the high school. And I said it at the Board of Ed meeting, what this should really be thought of is a Greenwich High School campus redevelopment project. That's what it is.
Because-
Not just
Mr. Mason had been waiting for a while.
So I'm going to apologize for the length of this. And I appreciate all the civics lessons, and I appreciate all the facts. I happen to tell you that those bleachers, everything you said about them is true, except you left out that they weren't maintained, because I was in an audit committee meeting. We have a risk issue with the bleachers, and they've been temporarily secured. But here's what I'm really trying to do. I don't want to see this community come unglued. And this is a very interesting take. Everything you're saying about the amenities, fantastic. I have no problem with that. But from a big picture point of view, there's two boards that have to get a community unified. Here's the problem I see. Phase 1, Phase 9, whatever triggers MI. I've spent 3.5 hours this week in P&Z on the POCD and specifically carved out when is an MI triggered. Not my forte, maybe it's yours, maybe it's not mine. To replace the bleachers, to change the light fixtures, to upgrade temporary restrooms, probably not an MI. When you start moving them and adding all that stuff, certainly it's an MI. Number one concern, and then we'll get to the big picture. Number one concern is the MI process for all of this. And there are people who are challenging us on Section 99 of the Charter and Section 100. You know that. You probably know it better than I do. I don't know what the answer is, but I think the town reasonably wants to follow that, get through an MI, and then finish on expenses for A&E and whatever. So this is a huge high school property redevelopment to improve usage. I get it. I'll live with that. Here's the problem I'm having, and this is where the Board of Ed, the BET, along with the RTM, need to stop the problem. So let's just change gears because this is part of our next Thursday night and part of our budget deliberations. The Board of Ed, back in June, approves and accepts your report from that gentleman over there on, and you actually asked that group to, this is your document, correct? You asked, uncommon, to ask the architect to give us a priority, but you did it. God bless. The stadium's not on here. Then, in the budget, came to us with 3 or 4 projects, and the one that seems to be gaining the attention is the high school security, converting the old, it was the science wing for me, but now it's the media center, converting that back to classroom and adding a wing for a new media center.
That's not what the proposal was, Mike.
But what, you know,
But
whatever's
that's
in the
not
capital
what
sheet.
we've requested.
Well, I'm just telling you what's in the budget book. So this budget committee thought, okay, the security part of that was kind of interesting. We kind of put a value on that. It's just what we read. Hold on. So now, here's my big problem. This project, the timeline for this is the same as your Greenwich High School Phase 1A, according to your minutes, which, as you know, we're about to get permission to do remediation on fields 6 and 7. This, we'll talk about finances later, but we have to talk about logistics. I mean, think about this. You're going to want to be doing work over here, redoing 2 fields, getting into converting classrooms. Whoa. That's just a question and a real concern.
Mike, the converting classrooms is not actually in our budget. The money that's in there for the front entranceway is for design work, so not actual construction work.
So
this is construction work that could actually occur in the year. If this money is approved and all the approvals
that's where I go
happen-
back to the MI, because we don't control that. We don't, both of us. I'm with you on this. But if I read your high school project, entry lobby security, new learning commons, and convert current library to classrooms, that's Phase 1A at the high school.
That was not in our request, Mike. Go back
It's
to our,
in-
go back to our budget book, Mike, see what our actual
Okay.
request was.
Uh,
That's not in the budget. That's
Okay.
not what we requested.
It's what's in our CIP.
No.
I don't remember. Well, we can have that debate, but the point I'm trying to make is, big picture, I'm concerned, when I hear all these projects, I am concerned about the bleachers. That's a liability for the town. We have to do something. Whether it's more securing right now, I don't know. The point is, all of that, there's definitely a change in use. There's no doubt you're going to need MI. I think, and I'm trying to defend my fellow members here, when they talk about phasing, they're trying to do it to ease the land use issues in order to accomplish, because I think all of us are very concerned about the bleachers. Moving the bleachers, to me, I would have to have P&Z here to say, why just moving them? And if you have a press box, you're replacing it. I don't see that triggering MI, but it may. These are the questions we need to get answers to. Remember, this is
We've
how
gotten
we
the answer.
prioritize.
Mike, we've talked to Katie, right? Katie's response is, because of the size of the press box,
Okay.
it triggers
So-
that because it affects your floor area ratio, right?
Gotcha.
That's an issue.
Gotcha.
Okay? That's a variance. If you are looking at doing a larger plan, don't come in and give us a site plan just for your bleachers.
No,
We've
we
been
know
told
that. We-
Don't
yeah.
piecemeal, right?
Yeah.
These are all bits of information that we have, happy to share that with you.
That's the issue we have as far as the charter. If whatever, the MI process, when you apply for one, they have 90 days to give you a yes or no. They can ask you for more information in that 90-day period, and maybe you can deliver it thumbs up. But if you can't, at the end of 90 days, the timeline's up, they got to give you the yes or the no. Or there's the process for the RTM to take up, and that's a separate part of the charter. I just, that's what I'm trying to show is a concern. We're looking at the prioritization, we have other capital projects, we have all the maintenance issues, and I'm just trying to say, how is this going to work? I'm not saying it's not. I'm asking, how is this going to work? Because if you look at the capital projects in the open capital projects and what you're requesting for your maintenance items, there's even projects in the high school there. So we're like, okay, this is getting really complicated. I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to tell you, this is the vision it's just not clear.
So some of this, Mike, depends on the timing, and that is actually, it's like a ballet, okay? To get bleachers, they have to create designs. We have to have money to create designs. It takes them a while to fabricate the bleachers, to get them here, to do the site work. We have sports seasons that go on. So discussion as to timing, we've talked about actually doing this at the end of the fall season, which is a possibility for them to actually do the installation. So students are not using that field at that point. It's separate and apart from the school to be done. It's been talked about and discussed. We've gone through a lot of these questions already.
So just to try to get us where we need to be, I think we understand the Board of Ed support for this project. We understand what you're trying to achieve by this project. I'm hearing fellow BET members, not necessarily in the same place as you, and I want to be aware, several people have used the word we. They're speaking for I, for themselves, because we are 12 individuals coming at this. I think in order for the BET to move forward with this, to be able to have the right discussion next week, is we do need to have a breakout of the proposed pieces of the project. We have, and as I define it to try to segment the project, and you probably can do a better job, we've got the bleacher, and it's not bleacher replacement in place. I don't think anybody would encourage doing a project that may not last for 20 years because there are other changes. I think a bleacher replacement is moving the bleachers. So it's moving the bleachers. It's, and then what's associated with that, what site plan requirement, what MI, documents for an MI approval would be necessary. I guess the press box is part of bleachers. You can't do one without the other. Is that correct? And a press box has to meet the requirements of the ADA Accessibility Act. It's not an option. So the elevator is not an option as far as moving forward with that press box. I have to ask the question. So is it the stupid question to ask is if it became smaller and what's the compromise? Okay.
So I did some code research and I saw your question. When it gets under 500 square feet, code does not require an elevator. You still may want an elevator, but now you have a 500 square foot room, and you need to get a lot of people up there. So they can either all march up the bleachers and get in, or they can take an elevator. Next question is, well, what's that elevator cost? The elevator cost is significant. It's a building. It's got footings. It's got electrical power. It's basically a three-story elevator. So that's about a $300,000 all-in cost. The committee really felt it was important, if you're going to do a project for accessibility, to make everything accessible. And it has great, the elevator also has good function for everybody else who needs to get into the press box without walking up the set of stairs.
So to fit, I'm just exploring all options here. It's the analyst in me. To be less than 500 square foot, it's 8 feet by 60.
Still pretty big.
Pretty big. So
Yeah,
the
so it's
12,
still about 5 or 6 times bigger than what's there today.
and I don't want to redesign, but it's 12 feet. And did the committee explore the pros and cons and needs of the extra 12 feet?
It's not about the 12 feet, Leslie, it's about the elevator and why you would do the elevator. So we didn't think about it in terms of the
Okay.
code. We are grappling with other facilities that we have that are not accessible. Even the portable bathrooms that are proposed in phase one would be accessible. We are trying to incorporate that in everything we do. It should be part of our design for every public project. The press box is no different.
And the longevity of an elevator and the maintenance cost of an elevator?
Well, I don't know about maintenance costs, but 25 to 30 years for the machines, the shaft, it would be 50, 100 years. ADA accessibility, I'll remind you, is a code and a civil rights issue.
So what is the current size of the press, or the size of the current press box, please?
Around 8 by 16, maybe 12. They get on the roof to film things.
They do.
This one would have a roof designed to be on with railings, so this is a safety improvement as well.
And I know that, don't want to be penny wise, pound foolish, so we do want to think holistically, but understanding the pieces of that, I think is important as we go.
You know, just as the guy who's going to be asked to price it, the home side bleachers, you do it, you do it. I don't think you would not do the road behind it if you would bleachers for you leave mud back. So the home side bleachers with the temporary toilets, I think would be one element. The visitor side bleachers are a distinct element. That could be priced separately or not. The lights could be a separate item, yes or no. And then there's the, it has an unusually high amount of soft costs, A&E fees and testing because of the MI and site plan. But those are not optional. You go forward with anything.
But the site plan probably, there's, if you didn't do the site, well, I'm thinking, how do you segment the site plan needs for just what you want to accomplish without, because the commitment to phase 2 and 3 to me is the larger commitment. That to me is the bigger discussion to have. What we're talking about here, I'm there that that making sure our current facilities are upgraded and what the players need and what the sports are acquiring at that point. The amount of cost versus benefit on the phase 2 and 3 is not quite as obvious to me, or I'm not there yet, let me just say that, because of what it's going to take to implement that for a stadium as opposed to other projects and other investment needs for the town's funding, okay? So the question is, that site plan that you're envisioning is, which was like 800,000 or something, if I'm trying to remember that number, but it's a big number, and a lot of that I thought would be attributable to the testing required for phase 2 and 3, but maybe you can't segregate that much. Do you have the breakout of the cost in some fashion tonight, or is this something?
The A&E fees for the site plan, it's 176,000.
176.
So there'll probably be some other testing. If you break the site plan into 3, you're going to spend not that money 3 times, but you're going to spend something like that money 3 times over, rather than do it once.
But the possibility would exist to go and make a site plan application showing the staged process and asking approval for the stages, meaning present the whole plan to them and ask for their permission, ask for site plan approval on phase 1 without guaranteeing that you would ever be doing phases 2 and 3. Ask them also for site plan approval at the same time for phase 1 and 2 without an assurance that you'll be doing phase 3, and ask them for site plan approval for phases 1, 2, and 3, and they can deal with that. I don't think there's any prohibition on that. The cost to make a site plan approval, having done the elevations and all the rest of the detail work to show all 3 stages, would clearly be more expensive than just doing a site plan approval for phase 1, but it's probably less expensive than to come back 3 times. And so the board could be making its own business decision how it wants to handle it. There's alternatives there, but I think those alternatives are fairly obvious. So I have numbers straight, just for those who wish to be supporting the project. You're asking, your revised request on a phased process for the first year is $3.8 million? And are you also saying that if this board wished to make a decision to approve that but not approve the elevator, your ask would be at $3.5 million? Am I in the correct place with that?
It's rough numbers. I mean, he can. Well, our request is our request. If you decide to make that decision, that's your choice.
No.
Right, and Russ can get the breakdown.
Of course, Peter, that's correct. I just would, having already found ourselves playing a guessing game on the $1.3 million.
No, I think
I'd like to, I'd
Right,
like
that's,
to be,
right, but he can get you the breakdown, because that's what Leslie's asked for.
that'd be
Right.
great.
So.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
but it was priced as a group with markups on the bottom, so you weren't asked to structure it that way. But we need to structure things that have to be there, because otherwise
Right.
you're going to artificially cherry pick a budget and have something that's going to be
Right.
nobody.
With those figures, you're going to have to tell us your estimates from P and Z, what they will require to get MI.
We'll try.
So have you sat down with the Commissioner of Public Works to make sure that this is feasible, given the next, we'll call it, at least 3 or 4 year program in terms of working on the fields and closing down the high school so that that program can continue?
The remediation she's talking
Yeah, remediation.
There's actually no remediation over on this side, so I don't know that would have any effect on what they're doing.
You can,
So,
the assumption is they can access the Route 1.
I'm sorry?
The field remains in service throughout the project.
Which field remains?
Stadium field.
Stadium.
The state. So
One.
throughout the other project?
And this one, there's no work inside the track.
No, I'm talking about the overall remediation project at the high school.
All this work is separate, and there's no overlap.
So all of your ingress and egress will only be from the post road for this project, is that correct? So so there would be no moving north from that project, it would all,
In phase 2, there's gonna
no, I'm only talking about phase 1 at this point in
In
time.
phase one, there's actually no way to drive across right now. It's just a small pedestrian bridge.
So you would not
There's a
be using?
natural
Right.
barrier.
Okay.
Yeah,
Stream.
exactly.
whatever's the water.
And the tennis courts.
Ms.
But you didn't
Vasiliotis?
answer my question. Have you met with the Commissioner of
I don't
Public
know
Works
that
on this?
they've met with them, but we know where the staging
met
is.
with everybody. A couple times.
Okay.
Actually, Public Works, Wetlands, Parks, Planning and Zoning, multiple times during the feasibility study. They saw all 3 options. They were one of the people who supported this through road. So, yes, we did.
Ms. Vasiliotis?
Yes. So that's a possibility anywhere you do anything in this town. Welcome to Greenwich. One of the things I think the neighbors will like is that we're anticipating increasing the parking spaces. That's been the road is actually also something else that the neighbors have actually expressed interest in. As for any particular neighbor, I can't comment on that. We've had comments from some of them as the process has gone along, and so far nobody's said this is the worst idea ever.
There was an open meeting.
Yeah, we had an open meeting at the high
Board of
school.
Ed with neighbors in attendance.
Yeah, they've been privy to this.
Okay, so I think follow-up would be to get a breakdown of the 3.8 million by the logical breakpoints as you identified them. If we could get that by Monday, that would be really helpful. Today's Tuesday.
As we
Week
mentioned to
Monday.
others, we have a working session on Wednesday. It would give us help if we could receive the material, sort of digest it, read through it, feel like we control it, ask you a question or two, and then have it in our hands when we gather on Wednesday.
Just one
No, next
question.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
So, forget our remediation issues. Did anybody ever ask since I like your term, whatever you used, Hillside Road property, has anybody ever had any other ideas about any other changes? In other words, off the redo what we have kind of theory rather than thinking out of the box?
Yeah, option A was pretty much some of that, but there are some code issues also with parking near your bleachers. So, and it's the other big issue was getting teams and players and emergency vehicles to the field.
I'm just saying, did anybody take a look? Because that's what the MI is. That's the challengers of MI are saying, well, what about just putting the stadium on field 6 and 7, making that field 6 and 7? I'm just making this up. But has that question ever been asked? Those kinds of questions been asked?
Yes.
Okay.
Option C was moving the field in its entirely, putting in an 8-lane track.
Good. Good.
Reorienting things.
Reorienting, the field's actually oriented the wrong direction.
Because that does that. It's not
No,
my
we
question.
talked
It
about
satisfies.
because
It does
turns out
satisfy questions.
We can't hold a major track and field event because our track's not big enough. So, and we looked at the possibility of doing that. It just didn't make much sense.
All right, well, thank you for bearing with the questioning and for that information, and we'll look forward to that follow-up.
Mr. Davis, why do you say the track is oriented in the wrong direction?
The field's
It should be north-south.
should be north-south, east-west. So for a soccer game in the afternoon, the goalie
The sun
on one
is-
side.
Oh,
the
it's
sun,
I never knew that.
the football game.
Okay.
So
I never knew that.
Yep.
could be a
Thank
home
you.
field advantage.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
So I know it's very late. We'll try and get through the next three Board of Ed items quickly. So we have ED 13, approval to use $12,820 for a replacement scoreboard being donated. In reviewing the documentation, we had follow-up questions about, does the donation cover all the costs of acquisition, shipping, installation, everything you can anticipate?
Getting my answers from the athletic director, Leslie, so I'm just going to read it. The
Okay.
donation covers the cost of acquisition, shipping, and installation. The replacement scoreboard will be installed onto an existing beams, and the solar options include to provide power to the scoreboard.
So you don't need any
No.
trenching for bringing power to the scoreboard. It's a standalone entity.
Right.
And,
Mhm.
and minimal additional maintenance cost if there's anything on this particular donation. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Obviously, there's two gifts here tonight we need to create appropriations for. The Board of Ed received the payment on the 12th of December. And this scoreboard, I think, was the donors intended, they wanted to have it ready for the baseball season coming up. We're getting it now. Is there, I'm part of the team that created a resolution so the Board of Ed could accept this without the RTM process. We have to give you an appropriation for it. It just concerns me why we couldn't have gotten this before the meeting. We've had 2 meetings, plus we've had 2 special meetings. We could have easily, this one and the other one, I consider the same. It would seem frustrating to the residents who are working hard to help us do stuff. And it might not be a question, is can we do better?
We can absolutely do better, Mike.
Any other questions or comments? Can I have a motion to recommend approval to
Seconded.
use the donation of the baseball scoreboard for $12,820? It was made by Mr. Mason, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All those in favor?
Aye.
4-0.
Where are you going?
ED 14,
Can we go to ED 15?
Board of Education, release of conditions on $200,000 of A&E, advanced A&E funding. This is, last year in the fiscal 19 budget, $700,000 of advanced A&E was requested. The $500,000 was available to the district on July 1, and the remaining $200,000 was conditioned based on demonstrated need. I don't have the exact wording. Is it in-
Roland, do you have the language of that condition?
I have it here.
Or do you?
So it's the condition 200,000 upon demonstrated need for architect and engineering services to be used for the planning of the fiscal 20 capital projects. So that's the condition.
Thank you.
So demonstrated need. Would you like to please let us know where you are and what's envisioned?
So,
Welcome,
As-
Dan.
what?
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. We currently, have $240,960 available left in that original request. We're dangerously close to hitting the $200,000 mark. I've got approximately $1.5 million worth of deferred construction costs that have already been approved. If we do some quick math, 1.5, 1.6 at 18% is about $240,000, if my high school math serves me well. So we're in need of additional funds. I'd hate to go over that number and show up on the front page again, so.
We would hate it too.
So that's, I mean, we're a little bit early asking for the release, but not too early.
And is it for fiscal 20 project, or is it for just projects in the open appropriation?
It's for fiscal 18 projects. Most of them are deferred, but there are a lot of fiscal 19 projects as well. And there are a few fiscal 20 projects as well. Most of those, we've asked for the A&E to be part of the project.
So when the projects that you have open appropriations for in prior budget seasons haven't yet been executed, you haven't done the A&E for those?
That's correct.
Until...
Most of them. We have a few that are, on the shelf waiting to go, but nothing substantial.
Okay.
And we have, projects ranging from boiler replacements or replacement of windows, roof access. They may be small projects, but we're still going to need documentation to go out for bid. We still need the use of professionals to create documentation.
Okay. Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, so you have nicely provided us a list of projects here. These projects have all been previously approved on the page, attached page to your,
No, they're all fiscal year 20 projects that are before us this year. You're going to be voting on them on next Thursday.
so now I'm confused. These projects include but are not limited to, and they have all these projects. Are these the ones that are listed here are only
I'm not
fiscal
sure.
year 20 projects, or are they projects that, I'm sorry?
Looking at what was submitted on the
As the second
on the
page of your,
form, the explanation to the BET of the request. You can borrow my copy if you'd like.
No, we've got them here.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, these are just some of the projects. These are the major, the hit parade. Again, there's some smaller ones that I didn't add on here that the cost would be minimum.
but these
Still-
projects have all been approved
Yes,
by this BET
correct.
already?
Not
Okay.
yet, because
Yes.
like the Hamilton Avenue fence is in the fiscal 20 budget.
The funding that was granted, the $700,000 worth of funding that was approved a year ago was A&E for you to be able to do, I had a good tutor on this afternoon. This was funding that was to be available to you during the course of this year for you to begin to do the A&E to prepare the projects that are going to be in the upcoming year, the projects for fiscal year 20. And each of these projects are projects that are before us for approval a week from Thursday. Those are the projects, and you're asking for release of the A&E money to do the prep work on that. The design of this is for you to do A&E work so that you can hit the ground running
Correct.
as the fiscal year starts.
Correct.
And so it's necessarily a setting, this setting that was created, that you're doing A&E on projects that aren't yet approved, you have to do the A&E to be able to hit the ground running. If we wait until after they're approved, you're going to lose a year with each of these projects. And so the projects that are listed here, with a little help from my colleague, I came to realize that each of these are projects that are in our capital sheets for us to vote on, but presumably all or most of them are going to be approved. And you're, in this year, doing the A&E work on it.
So Jeff, who helped you this afternoon?
Well,
I
I get help
explain-
from a lot of people, but in this case, it was Mrs. Moriarty.
I explained the concept, but if you do match this list to prior appropriations, it's not all fiscal 20. It's mostly fiscal 20.
And if you read the description, it clearly states preliminary design is associated with projects remaining from the 18-19 budget request and also those depicted in the 19-20.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure that I'd seen every single project here. I wanted to make sure that every project had been
It's not every
approved.
single project here. These are just the major ones that we hit on.
And, no, I mean, I wasn't sure that everyone, I didn't go tick, tick, tick and check every project. I just wanted confirmation that every project had been approved. So, so that's point number one. And then, you talked about preparing the documents to go out to bid. Who prepares, I mean, I can understand architecture and engineering, but then are you and your new colleague preparing the documents that are then released in terms of the preparation of the documents for the RFP, or are you having a third party prepare those?
The architect prepares.
Oh, the architect prepares all, so the document that, everything, more than just the plans, everything.
Correct. They do all the documentation presented to us as an RFP. We go over that with the purchasing department, and then it goes out for bid.
So, so what role then is this new person playing? Rather, I assumed that once you hired a new person, you wouldn't need as much A&E for the future.
I don't know where that came from. This person is clearly a project manager, not an architect, not a professional.
Okay, but in terms of, I guess, preparing the bid documents, I assumed that this person would be doing that kind of thing? No, that's not true?
He wouldn't be preparing them, no. He would be assisting the architect in making sure that what we asked for is created in the documents, depicted in the documents.
Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
I had a footnote, if I can, Mrs. Tarkington, that the A&E money that we'd granted in prior years was at the level of about $500,000. And as we came up to this a year ago, the amount was increased to $700,000. And you, Mrs. Tarkington, had raised a question about that. It was an increase of $200,000 over the figure that had preceded it a couple of years prior. And so on your motion, as I recall, you said, well, let's condition that additional $200,000 so that it's not released unless those funds are actually needed. And so as I understand it, the condition that's being addressed now is the condition that you had requested, that you didn't need, that you voted in favor, reluctantly as I recall, of the $700,000, but the additional $200,000, you wanted to have somebody like Dan come back and explain to us that you need these additional $200,000 before those funds are released.
That's
And
correct.
that's where we are today.
Right, and that's correct, Jeff, but at that point in time, we didn't have this additional person added to the department. That's been a new feature since our last approval, so I was asking additional questions
have no
to
quarrel.
clarify.
Sorry, I didn't mean that as a rebuke. I was only refreshing your recollection.
So-
no, I remember.
Okay.
I just want to ask, because going forward, I know that you're proposing a different alternative. You no longer, for fiscal 20, have an advanced A&E funding. You're putting the funding within the project. So what are you going to do a year from now?
Plan.
Before you get access to the funds? You won't get the funds till July 1st for fiscal 21 projects. So those won't be able to be started that summer. Are you now, is your capital plan really being pushed back a year?
Yes.
So
More
the-
or less. There's still some projects that will be going forward. But yeah, in essence, that's what we're doing.
So is it, so like the current fiscal 20 plan we have in front of us, I think some of those projects you're going to get moving more quickly, the ones that you'll be able to use this A&E money on. Others, if you get the appropriation, it's really to get, when you get access to the funds July 1st, you'll be planning, and the installation really is going to occur in the summer of 21.
Correct.
Or summer of 20, in that fiscal 21. so that everything that we're looking at really is, when it gets approved, it's more than a year before the project actually is going to get started. And I think that's a big change and a distinction that I'd like my fellow BET members to understand as we go forward.
I think I've noticed that as we in the Budget Committee approved these projects before, and I was wondering about that, but I figured I would watch.
Okay. With that, if no further questions, can I have a motion to recommend release of the conditions on A&E funding of $200,000?
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Mason? Aye, 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did we have one more? Does it
We
involve
do
you?
have
It's the local live.
85.
I don't know if it relates to you, Dan.
That is the
I'd like to
last-
get you home for dinner, but just one more item. Okay.
Sorry, home for dessert? I don't know.
Home for dessert,
Home to
yeah.
sleep.
Yeah.
ED 15 is a request for approval to use a donation of $22,969 for Local Live, which is a video service to broadcast athletic events. I think it's limited to athletic events at the high
Well,
school.
it could be for more, but right now, we're just talking about athletic events.
Okay. Why don't, if you can, I did forward some questions, but do you want to introduce the concept? Or-
Well, it's a service that most high schools in Fairfield County have been using for almost a year now. We had a previous service. It was called Han, and
It was
Han went
called
out
what?
of business. Han.
On?
Han, yeah. They went out of business. Local Live came and made a proposal to not just our school district, but multiple school districts to put cameras and to fix cameras in different areas, like on Cardinal Field, in the pool, in the gymnasium, so that if parents couldn't be there to see a game, they could actually watch it on this, or grandparents or whatever. So that's the whole concept. And the Greenwich Association for Greenwich Athletic Foundation has given us $22,000 for the first year of this contract. It's a 3-year contract, but we can terminate it at any time.
Oh, you can?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Are there any other obligations the district has with entering this contract, costs or commitments that you need to make?
I don't believe that there's any other commitments we have to make. The reason this took so long to get here was that we were having issues with insurance and that kind of thing. But all of those issues have been worked out. So now we can actually accept the money, and so the cameras can actually be installed. But there is no other
No
conditions.
financial or other things? And
No.
And they own the rights to the video, is that
They do own
typical?
the right to the video.
And so the school needs to buy them back or enter some other agreement to get access to them if coaches want the video?
I'm sorry. Local Live states that they do not own the rights to the video, but instead own the rights to broadcast distribution.
Okay.
Sorry.
And the question of requiring approval of images of minors, I know that the district has a policy about that, but does this become an issue with this?
I don't, Leslie, I don't believe it does, but we can always have parents sign off saying that they don't want their child's image displayed. But these are athletic events that people pay to get into, so these are basically public events. So I don't think we need that kind of sign off on this kind of. These are Greenwich High School sports. It's not
Right, but not everyone is paid to observe. When you say pay to get into, I'm not sure what you mean. There's no
Well, you have to
admission
buy
on
like if
everything.
you go to a football game, you have to buy a ticket.
But you don't, not if you go to a soccer game or a lacrosse
Well,
game
not every,
or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah, it's not every game, but
Right. So it's just something to
I mean, it's the
to
same thing
consider and
if,
explore. You don't want to end up in a situation
no.
where.
But I don't believe it is in violation of any
And
of
are
our
there
policies.
limits to their, they broadcast it so they can charge revenue? Are there limits to how they can use these images? Look, my son plays a sport at college. I'm watching it on the video all the time. I know that this is a common practice and it's expanding. But I'm just wondering, are there any other potential issues that might impact the high school or the district, especially since they're minors.
Well, the one thing they don't do is, one of the questions that was asked was advertising. They don't advertise on.
Okay.
So, local light will not be selling or broadcasting advertising for streamed events.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, it was a little unclear as to what, sorry. Sorry,
Recognize
sorry.
Ms.
Of course,
Tarkington
yeah, sorry,
first. Ms.
sorry,
Tarkington?
sorry.
Yes, I just had a couple questions based on the package that was delivered. On the page that said Cardinal Stadium, it says there's power connectivity in the box, whatever that means, as well as the imminent installation of a fair play scoreboard. I didn't know what that meant, but I wondered if that would raise neighborhood issues.
It's already in.
It's already in. The scoreboard's been in,
Accepted
Oh,
since
so
the
we
fall,
accepted
yeah.
that for this? It's not in addition to
The
this?
scoreboard had options.
Right, it's just going to connect to the scoreboard, that's all. That's what that means.
As the imminent installation of a, okay, so it's already there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that doesn't say that. And then also, under the mobile unit, it says, note, power outlets need to be installed by school at Field 7. Are there plans to do that?
Right now, we're not, I don't think we're anticipating putting those up at, and 6 and 7 right now.
What they're talking about is with this program, there is either one or two handheld cameras that are installed that the athletic department will either have somebody use or one of the students will be holding the camera. And it's a recharging issue. The camera needs to be recharged. There's not currently power at the baseball field. We'll just have to make do with battery power.
However,
you.
on that note, if 6 and 7 will be redone sometime soon, and you may anticipate a power need, that would be the time to do the trenching for it. Or just longer, I don't know.
Think of what you have to come through.
Mr. Raymer?
So the $23,000, it purchases the service for a period of what, 2 years?
For a year.
1 year. We have no commitment to do it for the second year.
No, we do not.
So if we have a generous donation like that again, we can choose to do so. If we don't, we can make the election about whether or not it's worth the cost, or we
Correct.
can terminate.
Yep.
Are we purchasing any hardware and equipment?
No, this is their equipment.
This is their equipment. They come in and they provide the service, and they do it for a year, and each year is an option.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Leslie, just back to your question about images of it's a public event. I don't mean it's a
Okay.
public event. so.
Yeah.
I mean, but to her point, you might wish to deal with the issue of that a child, when he agrees to participate in the team, he also then agrees that he is a participant in the publication of filming of that.
And we can take a look at what the other FCX schools do for that in terms of permission. That's not, that we'll have Gus take a look at that.
And if I might add, as a parent of a high school student, this is a recruitment tool. There's not a parent out there who's not.
Yeah.
And from what we're seeing in the news media, it's great. We can now begin to substitute faces.
Okay, let's not go there. Let's not go there. I knew that was coming. Any other questions or comments? I just, only because you're here, conditions, you're very aware of your conditions, but you've got 2 more projects that were conditioned from last year. One of them especially, if you get the approvals to do 6 and 7 this year, there's a condition, I think still existing on release of those, changing the carpet, subject to
Type
the
of turf, yeah,
approval.
we're very aware of that.
And there are 2 of them. One is
Turf.
DEP approval, and second is the fill. So there are 2 conditions on there. And then the infill, correct?
Yeah,
And then
it was
the,
supposed to be similar to what we did in Cardinal Stadium.
And
If I'm- yeah, okay.
the Central Middle School athletic fields, 150 of the 300 was conditioned. Are you moving forward with any studies there?
I'm sorry, Central?
Central.
Central.
The feasibility, yeah, but we haven't really kicked that off yet. We're hoping to do some work over the next break.
She's warning you that some of the
Okay.
funds are conditioned.
No, I'm aware.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
very well aware.
Okay, very good.
It's like posted on my wall now.
It's too wet to test.
Okay.
So the report will come back if we need drainage.
We
I
believe
just-
there's quite a few things posted on your wall.
All right. Okay, any other further,
No.
So we didn't vote on that yet.
No.
Can I have a
No.
motion to recommend acceptance and approval to use the 22,969? We'll round the cents off if that's okay.
I'll move it.
Any second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 4-0. Okay. Those will all be placed on the BET agenda next Monday, and Jill
Oh,
will
I'm
let
sorry,
you
this
know.
is routine or non-routine? What do you want to do with it?
I would say this would be routine. That would be my recommendation.
We voted on 3 of them, maybe we should.
I would say all 3 are routine.
I'd move that, how's that?
Okay.
I don't think we need to do it separately. I think what Leslie just said. We'll just-
Okay.
Okay.
For the minutes, we just make sure that.
May I have a motion to it? Oh, no,
No, no,
minutes.
no, we have
got
minutes.
minutes. We worked so hard on those minutes.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for staying so late. So we distributed minutes for February 12th, February 27th, and March 1st. There are still
So I
7
would,
more days to come.
I would move that we approve these 3 sets of minutes.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Mike, you are a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So, it's seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.